So thank you all very much for being here today on this Veterans Day. So let me first start by saying again, any veterans out there watching this, either live stream or via the recording, happy Veterans Day to you. Thank you for what you did. You know, and we know your country owes you a debt of gratitude. And so thank you very, very much. The other thing I want to also thank our Vietnam veterans for being here today. This is one of my favorite panels every year. We always have a good time either on the panel or off the panel or before the panel or after the panel. Great stories, lots of laughs, and just a really heartfelt thank you to you all for sharing this with us. I think it's just vitally important for our nation and our community to hear from you and to continue to hear from you. So thank you and welcome back. For everybody else, welcome to this Veterans Week. This is day 3 and it is Veterans Day again. We have this panel and more to come. But I want to turn this over to Lawrence Dolph, good friend of mine, and let him take this away.
Hey, thank you all for coming. I am Lawrence Dolph, and about 51 years ago, I enjoyed an all-expense-paid trip to Southeast Asia. The accommodations were terrible, the food was lousy, and there were people shooting at me I had never even met. But we are going to start with stories from each of 5 veterans. I'm one of them. Our first veteran is Warrant Officer and Huey helicopter pilot Dale Throneberry. Dale, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm getting ready to pull pitch here at the VFW 423 Hall down on Wagner Road here in Ann Arbor, along with my good friend Larry St. Antoine, who is a Navy veteran, and I'll be introducing him in just a moment. I guess the story would have to begin, like many of us on the panel, with a letter that I got from the President of the United States, actually. And he said, come on down. We've got a really fun place for you to go. And so I did. I got my draft notice. I was hoping to get drafted by the Yankees, but that didn't work out. And so I went down to Newark, New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey originally. Please don't hold that against me. And took a physical with 500 of my closest friends, all in our whitey tighties and carrying a little file along with us. And doctors would look at us in various places that no one had ever looked and said, you pass. And I'm going, go, now what do I do? I said, how long do I have? And he said, 6 weeks. I said, okay. So I ran down to the recruiters and I went to the Navy and the Air Force first, but they were full up. They had a 6-month waiting period, so I couldn't do that. I went to the Marines, and they were really nice to me. They, they have those really cool uniforms. And he said, "How would you like to be an officer? I see you have some college." And I said, "Sort of." And he says, "Well, you could leave tomorrow." And I said, I have a date tonight. Let me think about this. And the last one on the line was the Army recruiter, and he says, "How would you like to be a pilot?" And I said, "Ooh, of what?" He said, "Helicopters." I said, "Oh, I've seen some of those." Sure, why not? I'll try. So I took an aptitude test and somehow I passed that, and because the instructor said, "You're not going to make it through." But the way the warrant officer program was, if you didn't make it all the way through flight school, you only had a 2-year obligation. And flight school took a little bit, almost a year, including basic, probably about a year and 3 months. So you figure, well, if I'd wash out, then I only have, 6 months to go. So I ended up going to Fort Polk, Louisiana, birthplace of the combat infantryman for Vietnam. It said in a big sign over the gate. And I asked the sergeant kindly, he was very nice, Sergeant Steele, true name, I promise. He was about 6'8". And I should back up on this. This is the interesting part of the story. When my mother found out that I was going to go to Fort Polk, Louisiana, I had to go by airplane. And this was the very first time I'd ever been on a commercial airliner. And so my mother insisted that I wear a suit, including a tie. And so when I got off the bus at Fort Polk and Sergeant Steele saw me, he turned around and looked at all the other drill sergeants with their very nice Smokey the Bear hats on and says, "We have a suit here." And the next thing I know is I'm doing push-ups in a mud puddle somewhere in Leesville, Louisiana. Anyway, so I go off to basic training, and I really enjoyed basic training. I thought that was kind of cool. They made me a platoon leader, I guess because I was the biggest. And so I didn't have any KP or anything, but I was responsible for 60 people from parts of the country I'd never been to, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, East Texas, and so forth. And I couldn't understand them, and they couldn't understand my accent because I still had a pretty good Jersey accent going at the time. And so whenever they did anything that messed up, I got to do the push-ups for them. Sergeant Steele was very kind to let me do that. Got out of basic training, survived that. I always regarded basic training as like a big giant Boy Scout camp. It was, I mean, we got to shoot rifles, we got to throw hand grenades, we got to do confidence courses, we got to run, we got to fight, we got to hit each other with pugil sticks, all kinds of fun things, I thought. And so after I graduated from there, they sent me off to Fort Walters, Texas for primary flight school. So primary flight school was, we flew in little tiny helicopters. They don't even make them anymore. They would only hold 2 people. And to fly a helicopter, the easiest way to describe it is that you use both hands, both feet, and your head all at the same time. Because you've got, you have a cyclic that makes it go forward and backwards. You have a collective on your left side that makes you go up and down. And every time you switch around one of those things, the tail rotor of the aircraft wants to go one way or the other. So you have to use your feet on the pedals to get that to go straight. So the first day that we were out in the helicopters, it looked like a giant square dance. Helicopters were going up in the air. They were spinning around. They were hitting the ground hard. They were bouncing up in the air until the instructor pilot would take control and everything would stop. And then you could see when they would give a control to the students. So we got 1 control a day. That's all they all allotted to us. I know those guys had to drink a lot. So about 3 weeks into flight training, I was given the opportunity. My flight instructor got out of the helicopter on the ground. And he says, "Okay, take it around." I said, "Who?" He says, "You." I said, "What, by myself?" He goes, "Yeah, you can do this." Oh, okay. So I did. I soloed on April 8th, 1968. A day to remember. I'll come back to that in just a second. So anyway, so I did that, flew around for a while, ended up going down to Fort Rucker, Mother Rucker, home of Army Aviation, and it is correct, MR. It's still called Mother Rucker by anybody who's ever involved with Army Aviation. There we transitioned into the Huey, which is the most wonderful aircraft in the history of mankind. I think it was dependable. It was almost indestructible. And no matter what you did to it to break it, most of the time you couldn't. So transitioned into the Huey, did all instrument training, learned how to fly into clouds, which is, I don't recommend to anybody. Tactical training, low-level flight, auto rotations, which was a big deal. That's to land the aircraft without any engine power. That's when the automatic gravity system kicked in. And from there, I went to Vietnam and sent over in December of 1968. And I was with the 195th Assault Helicopter Company in Vietnam out of 3 Corps. 3 Corps was Saigon, and we worked out of the northwest corner of 3 Corps. If there's a map anywhere, I should have put that out between the Fishhook and the Parrot's Beak, Plain of Reeds, that area out there on the Cambodian border. Our aircraft were camouflaged. We were the only Army unit that had camouflaged aircraft. No identification on it because most of our missions were to carry, go into Cambodia and drop off secret teams. We weren't allowed to be there. And so we would do that on a regular basis, and then we'd have to go and get them because they would invariably run into trouble, and they would call us to get them in the middle of the night, which was always my favorite. So I was what they called a Peter pilot for 3 months, and then on April, or almost 4, on April 8th, remember that date, of 1969, I became an aircraft commander, which meant I had my own helicopter. It's kind of like, you know, getting your driver's license. Now you're in charge. It was a great experience. In Vietnam, I still have friends that I served with over there. Flying in a helicopter is like a magic carpet. It's like you're Aladdin, and we would pop up above the clouds every once in a while and just consider how lucky we were to be able to do that. We didn't realize how dumb we were because we could have gotten ourselves killed. But so for a year I did that. Came back from Vietnam, went back to Mother Rucker, Southeast Asia, Southeast Alabama, same. Was an instructor pilot for another year and a half, which was more dangerous than being in Vietnam, I discovered. Students had a tendency to want to fly into trees and wires and things. When I got out of there in May of 1971, I came into Michigan and went to Washtenaw Community College, transferred to U of M, ended up with a bachelor's degree in elementary education because I was going to save the world. Got a master's in radio, TV, and film production, which I love, and I'm still doing today, surprisingly, is that I host a radio program here in Ann Arbor called Veterans Radio, and we've been doing it now, coming up next week, or 17 years. I ended up with a little over 2,200 flight hours, 1,200 combat flight hours, 23 air medals. Luckily, I didn't do anything too silly to get, you know, awarded distinguished flying crosses or anything along those lines. So did my job, came home safely. And I think that's about my story there, Laurie.
Excellent. I love it. I'm just amazed that I guess I'm glad to hear the Huey was that reliable, because, you know, I would get into them. You guys would taxi me places. By the way, we never invaded Cambodia. We had bad maps, just to be clear.
Well, I can tell you that the Air Force kept warning me that I was going into Cambodia, which was really not a very good thing to do. They would come over the guard radio, which is where every aircraft in Vietnam listens to guard, because if you go down, that's where you start yelling out Mayday, Mayday. And they would come over the guard channel and say, aircraft heading, you know, north out of Budap, be advised you're crossing a fence. And we go, shh, don't tell anybody.
Larry, you have a story.
Oh, along with everybody else, I'm sure. Mine begins in 1964. I was a junior in high school, and one day the recruiters came in from all the services, and I was talking to the Navy recruiter, and he asked me, he said, what kind of experience you got? And I said, well, I worked construction with my dad since I was 8 years old. He says, well, you want to be a Seabee? And I said, what the heck is a Seabee? He says, well, you know, they're electricians, construction battalions, where you're electrician, equipment operator, plumber, steel worker. And he said, you do the same thing that the regular Navy does. You go for 9 months on tour and then 3 months back at the States. And he says, the Seabees, home ports away from the States is Haliloch, Scotland, and Rhoda, Spain. And I said, sounds real good. Sign me up. Well, number one, I wasn't old enough, but my dad did sign me up. And I signed up for the Seabee Reserves, which were stationed at Broadhead Naval Armory in Detroit. And I signed up for 6 years. It was 2 years active, 2 years inactive, and 2 years ready reserve. So I was still a junior in high school. And that summer between junior and senior year, I spent 8 weeks at the Naval Training Center in Great Lakes, Illinois, going through the regular boot camp. And then when I got through there, I went back and did my senior year. So basically what I did was my 2 years ready reserve before I even went. And in September on my birthday in 1966, I headed to find out where they were going to send me for my active duty. And I was at the Philadelphia Naval Yard, and the senior chief come up and said, here's your paperwork. You have 3 choices. Where do you want to be stationed? I said, well, obviously Haliloch, Scotland, Rhoda, Spain. And I thought, oh, I'll write down Australia too. And he came up and he crossed off all 3 of them. He says, you're a Seabee, right? I said, yeah. He says, well, we'll put Vietnam, 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 because that's where all the Seabees are going. So that was a rude awakening, but it was 1966, so I knew things were going on then. I was assigned to Port Hueneme, California, Mobile Construction Battalion 4, which was one of 6 Seabee battalions still commissioned since World War II. I did my training at Port Hueneme, and I did my military training at Camp Pendleton with the Marines, because basically we were kind of more conditioned as Marines with the fighting and working. So in my battalion shipped out to Vietnam in 1966. Because we did 9-month tours, we had to keep going back every 3 months. My battalion did 4 tours in Vietnam. Couple CB battalions did 6 tours. Totally, they recommissioned 21 other CB battalions from World War II. So the total of CBs in Vietnam were 27,000 at one time. I was stationed in I Corps up north with my battalion. Half the battalions were in I Corps and the rest were down south. Basically, our job in Vietnam was keeping the infrastructure up, the roads, anything that needed repairing, we repaired. We built airfields, we built base camps, mostly for the Marines, but we did a lot of Army base camps too. One of our basic achievements was building Khe Sahn up north on the DMZ. We had to take the whole top of a mountain down and make a runway so that some of the largest plane would come in would be a Caribou to drop off supplies and men. We did our 9-month tour, and we were heading back to the States for our 3 months to recondition our equipment and get more men. Unfortunately, 2 weeks into our 3-month tour in the United States, we get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning. They said, pack your sea bags, tomorrow you're flying back to Vietnam. A thing called Tet started last night. So our little vacation back at the States was pretty short. So we flew back in 68. We didn't even have weapons or anything. When we got there, we had to collect our weapons. And that's when we went from the M14 to the M16, which really didn't work very well for us. A lot of the times, the stuff that we did besides the keeping up the infrastructure, we also have what we called a civic action group. It's a 13-man squad that would go village to village. We would have a doctor and a corpsman with us, and we would improve the living conditions of the Vietnamese people. The doctors would take care of any sickness or any injuries. We would take care of any water treatment, dig wells for them. Help them with the building of the buildings. We built a lot of schools. We built a lot of wells, and all the infrastructure that we built with the roads and everything else. It was during the Tet Offensive that we had one of our sea battalions that was stuck up in Khe Sahn, and they were there through the whole time that the siege was going on. But luckily, I made it through up the next 9 months until September 6th on my mother's birthday, 1968, when I flew back to the United States to continue my life as it was. Did a lot of different odd jobs. I was a plumber for a while. I was a police officer in Detroit for a while. I ended up training racehorses. And then finally, I got a job delivering mail, rural mail carrier. So I retired from there, and that's where I'm at right now. I'm retired and enjoying life.
Larry, terrific story. Amazing service, multiple tours. Then you went to an even tougher place, the post office.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I was surprised when I looked at my DD-214 and I saw that I spent 1 year, 11 months, and 28 days in Vietnam. I thought, geez, it seemed like it was just overnight. I was hardly there.
Yeah, who's counted? Hey, John, do you have a story for us?
Oh, Larry, I'm honored to be here today and proud to be here with all of the students and fellow veterans on Veterans Day. It's a special day. I was drafted into the Army in February of 1966. I was trained as a radio operator and I was sent to Vietnam in October of 1966. Sent to Vietnam like all the rest of us who went, not knowing anything about, the peoples of Vietnam. We were just sent there to follow orders. That's what military people do. I was a battalion RTO in an infantry unit. And unfortunately, during the time I was there, my 12 months, we were in an area of operation that did not see a lot of enemy activity, and not compared to some others. I came home, and one of the things that we haven't discussed here is the coming home part of us when we returned. I came home in October of 1967, which was just prior to the real buildup of the anti-war movement in Vietnam, here in Ann Arbor. I'm sorry, about Vietnam, here in Ann Arbor and across the nation. As an example for your students, you have to think about somebody who's been camping for a year, eating sea rations that are 20 years old, fighting mosquitoes, the threat of enemy activity almost every day, every moment. You come home and you try to go back to real life. And I went back to Eastern Michigan University. I was taking a liberal arts course, and I'd gone back to Ford Motor Company right away just to get my life back in some kind of sense of normality. And it was a Friday afternoon when this, I believe it was an English or composition liberal arts professor, at the end of the class, he said, "I hope you're all coming with us over to Ann Arbor to join the anti-war demonstration." And it smacked me right in the face to think that here in the United States, people were demonstrating a war that guys that I left over there were still fighting for their life and doing what we were asked to do. Upon that statement, I just sort of closed that chapter, and I didn't talk about Vietnam. I didn't talk about being a veteran. In fact, I got a second job just to keep myself busy and going to school at the same time. It was a time when I was getting promoted within the Ford Motor Company ranks, and I wouldn't tell anybody that I served in Vietnam for fear that it might impact a promotion. It was terrible, that you couldn't feel proud. But we survived, we made it, and here we are today, 50 or 55 years later. I'm proud to call these guys my friends. And if you served in Vietnam, I knew you because you went through the same heat, the same muck, the same monsoons, the same, you didn't have to stand next to me, and I know you, and I want to thank you all. Laurie, that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
John, thank you. I have to say that it was at least 30 years after I got out of the service that somebody thanked me for my service. I was on jury duty. I was thanked by a police officer also on jury duty, and my mouth fell almost to my feet because like you, we all just kept quiet about it for a long, long time. We felt we had to.
Yes.
That's the way it went. All right, guys, I'm going to tell you a story. Phil, are you ready with my PowerPoint? Don't start it yet, but I just want to make sure you're alert and alive. Phil, are you there?
I'm mostly both.
Okay, well, you are my favorite, I have to say. Okay, here we go. No slide yet, but pretty quick.
Okay.
It was about 2 hours before dark when we spilled out of our wooden hooch in full combat gear and began to climb aboard the deuce-and-a-half truck that would take us to our patrol jump off. "Bring me Dix," our executive officer bid us with a broad grin. No doubt another PTSD case unfolding. Welcome to another night of night ambush patrol. I'm Private First Class Lawrence Dolph. Come along with me. First slide, please, Phil.
Just a second. Ooh.
Got it?
Yep. Can you
Okay,
see it?
Yes.
I can,
Okay.
but now I have to get back to my story. Hold on a minute here, folks. All right. Behind us as we rolled through the wire was Dong Tam, a 3-mile by 1-mile base camp that housed the 15,000 of us who formed the 9th Infantry Division. It was bristling with artillery. There was a landing strip for Puff the Magic Dragon and other fixed-wing gunship reconnaissance and cargo planes. A big area was devoted to Huey and Cobra helicopters. Inside this camp were hot showers, an air-conditioned library, a swimming pool, company yards and mess halls, a hospital, Graves registration, and the division command, which included a corps of Army news correspondents. The western flank of this fortress lay on the bank of the Mekong River with a deep water harbor dug the previous year for large Navy vessels by the world's largest dredge. We couldn't believe the Viet Cong had sunk that dredge. They couldn't believe we had another one. That was Dong Tam. Next slide, Phil. Tell me when it's up.
There we go. Is that it?
Yep. Did you see the movie Apocalypse Now with the helicopter assault coming over the water as the Ride of the Valkyries plays? We could do that any day of the week in 4 locations at the same time, which is why small teams of Viet Cong mortared the base camp every night. And every now and then, 400 or more would attack it, like the night they blew up the ammo dump. Next slide. My job, along with 10 other guys, was to venture into no man's land far beyond the wire to engage them in the dark. We were just one of several such squads. We didn't know where the others were. Hell, we didn't know where we were or how many of the enemy we would be facing. Next slide. After we slipped over the berm and got trucked towards our target, we would hike and sometimes swim in 100% humidity, 100-degree heat, carrying belts of machine gun ammo, Claymore Marnes, Starlight scopes, 2 M60s, 2 M39 grenade launchers, M16 rifles, and at least 600 rounds for each of us, a few cans of sea rations, and 2 canteens. We wore heavy steel helmets, and some of us wore flak jackets, where others went bare-chested. Every step was accompanied to the jostle of percussion smoke grenades hung from our web gear. There were cobras in the sky and cobras on the ground. Next slide, please. If you look up at the first, you'll step in the second. We arrived at our day hole position near dusk and prepared a quick dinner. A tiny piece of C4 explosive from the bricks we carried made an excellent camp stove. Just don't step on it, or as we said, you will only step on it once. Next slide. The hot dog and beans were great. The beef hash or spaghetti with meat sauce was okay. Do not eat the scrambled eggs or the ham and lima beans. Whatever you ate cost taxpayers $100 for each of us because of that mini frosted wheat burning C4 biscuit. Afterwards, we ate canned peaches or fruit cocktail. Some of us ate only those, but however you looked at it, it was $1,000 dinner every night we were out there. Darkness fell and we started to move a short distance to set up an ambush, as we always did. The enemy would know we were there, but not exactly where. That night, to get to our site, we had to cross an open paddy. Suddenly, M16 rifle fire poured out of a wood line on our left, every 4th round marked by a brilliant light of a tracer. The rifle fired 600 rounds a minute, and this looked like a death ray in a sci-fi movie. Next slide.
Oh, man.
ARVN, our Vietnamese allies, we figured, but we didn't know. Their fire was immediately answered by the louder and lower clacking of AK-47s. Clearly, they were Viet Cong, and their tracer fire stream formed counter death rays. We froze on open ground. They saw us, and both sides hit us with everything they had. I was in the ground. It was hard from the dry season, and my nose filled with dust and the smell of decay. Overhead, I heard the unmistakable thumping of Huey helicopter blades. Sinister, primal, tantalizing. Air cover, I thought. But then the door gunner of the Huey opened up on us. I watched his death ray march across the ground right up to my face and then abruptly stop. We lay motionless on the ground, all 11 of us. I had no idea how many were dead. Whatever our squad leader was thinking, it was the South Carolina draw of our medic, the coolest man in the unit, who said, I'm going to count to 3. On 3, we run for that ditch. 1. That night, I had the misfortune of carrying the PRC-25 radio, a great metal box with a long trailing antenna. It was a rule of the Viet Cong to shoot the guy with the radio first. I've been a star sprinter on the Ann Arbor High track team. Some people thought I would win the state championship, but I didn't. But were that race stage that night, I would have won. The Kong with a machine gun couldn't keep up with me. I was first to the ditch, rolled sharply left, popped up, and laid down suppressing fire to cover the others. Miraculously, all 11 of us made it. We called in my radio for artillery, and Dong Tam pounded the wood line on the right with 105s. But the Viet Cong were experienced. I'm sure they had left before even the first round landed. I shivered through the night, covered in sweat. In the first light of morning, my shirt was dry. I found it had been shot out on both sides. I didn't have so much as a scratch. Next slide. The company to which I'd been assigned had been wiped out by the VC before I and all the others that night had showed up as replacements. No one bothered to tell us we were taking the places of dead men. We returned to the base camp. Those who could slept. I took a hot shower and wrote letters, and then we saddled up to go out again. That night, we moved in full company formation, 190 of us. We walked into a Viet Cong ambush set up to be at point blank range. I'm pretty sure these were the guys who had previously killed our company. The poor bastards. That night, we killed them all. The next day, my orders came through. I was now a division level Army news correspondent. My releases were published verbatim all over the world. Soon I was a Spec 5 with a Bronze Star and an Army Commendation Medal. I was given the opportunity to walk major newspaper and television reporters around my corner of Vietnam. For the television guys, I found a rough wall and brought some nipa palm trees to plant. They would do their stand-up. I'm at the front now. My two guys and I would squeeze off captured AK-47s off camera. We're taking heavy fire. Those reporters loved me, and I learned something I never forgot. There were 3 stories in Vietnam, probably the same as in every war. There was what the military says is happening, slide. There's what the news media says is happening, slide. And there is what is happening, slide. Okay, guys, that's my story. I'm succeeded by Peter Dodge, a medic in the Army. Pete, you're on.
All right. Am I live?
You're live. We can hear you.
Okay, excellent.
Phil, you want to get me off? There we go.
There we go.
Proceed, Pete.
And Phil, if you found the 2 JPEG photos I emailed to you just before we started, you can put them up. That's me, but I'm better looking now. And we got a picture, I hope, of the place where we were situated. It's a privilege. There we go. There we go. My story is a Vietnam memoir, one day in the Vietnam War, but it's a different story than the others because I'm the only guy on the panel who never was boots on the ground. And that's part of my story. So I will just tantalize you with a working title for this. A different country, a different war, a different weapon. I am with my brother Mike, who's listening in today. Mike and I are descendants, 3 generations of physicians who are also military veterans serving in time of war. And my story today really descends out of their experiences. Our great-grandfather enlisted in the Union Army, served as a cavalryman through many campaigns in the Civil War, including Gettysburg, finished his service, went home to Chicago, went to medical school, and then spent the rest of his life as a distinguished physician and an advocate for veterans. And he always told veterans to tell their stories. His son, our grandfather, is a medical doctor serving in the high mountains of Colorado, the last frontier of the United States, when Pancho Villa invaded Texas and killed 17 Americans in Columbus, Texas. And so my grandfather, our grandfather, accepted a commission as an Army medical officer deployed to the southern border. And then when Villa was handled, deployed again to San Diego and joined the American Expeditionary Force and sailed to France. He wound up as the commandant of an evacuation hospital in a small village somewhere behind the American lines. We have a letter from him that he wrote on November 11th, 1918. And he said, I'm in the town conferring with the mayor. I'm the civic action officer for our unit. And a man just burst in the door screaming, "La guerre est finie aujourd'hui, aujourd'hui la guerre est finie." The war is over today. Today, the war is over. We got a letter he sent his family, my dad, aunt, grandmother, a letter 3 days later. He said, "It's a privilege. I've just taken into my hospital 125 US Army POWs. They have just been released from a German prisoner of war camp. And we're getting 300 more tomorrow. And I've interviewed them all." He went on to become a VA hospital administrator. Our father, a physician, trained in epidemiology at the University of Michigan. So thank you, University of Michigan. In 1954, he was commissioned as a medical officer in the US Army, served at Walter Reed, and then received orders to deploy to Korea. He arrived in Korea, and his mission was to investigate a lethal disease that was ravaging the peasant population, the rice villagers below the DMZ, and was infecting the troops. And American troops were dying of a disease that Western medicine hardly understood. And so he divided his time, and we got letters almost every day from him, either in the field hospitals in Seoul, interviewing American troops who were living through this disease or dying, as many did, trying to understand everything about their experience that might suggest how they contracted the disease, which apparently they were getting out in the villages. And then he went into the villages and spent several weeks driving around with a medical translator, interviewing the people themselves. He was very impressed by how brave and how strong they'd been, because their villages had been destroyed 3 times during the Korean War, and tried to learn everything he could that might identify how this disease was spread. The research at that time was inconclusive. When I joined the Army 15 years ago, it was still inconclusive. But when he came home, he said to the family that apart from his marriage and his children, the great personal experience of his life was his experience in Korea. And Mike and I internalized that. And so 10 years later, Mike, after a year at the University of Michigan, said, "This isn't for me," dropped out, joined the Army. So he could go to Germany, he chose infantry. And he wound up in an infantry division in Augsburg, Germany. And when he went in to see the first sergeant after he arrived, the first sergeant said, "You're a college man, aren't you?" Mike said, "Well, yeah, I dropped out after 1 year." And the sergeant said, "From where?" And he said, "University of Michigan." And the first sergeant said, "Fine, you can read the technical manuals, you can read the ARs, you're our new medic." And so Mike wound up as a medic. Family tradition continued. I enlisted in 1968 and offered a choice of MOS. I said, I want to be a medic. And if I can, I want something involved in preventive medicine or mental health. And so I then went to Fort Polk. Dale and I are both card-carrying members of the Fort Polk Alumni Association, although I didn't get Sergeant Steele, thank God. And trained at Fort Sam at the Army's Medical Field Service School. And we class of 130, 130 guys got orders for Vietnam. I, for some reason, despite putting Vietnam on all my forms 20, was sent to Thailand. So that's our different country. I was sent to a base in a field hospital in northern Thailand. We were U.S. Army engineer and transportation company supporting a U.S. Army Air Force base. The Air Force base was principally fighter bomber squadrons, F-4s and F-105s. Their mission, and they took off day after day, hour after hour, with napalm and rockets under their wings, was to fly tactical missions over Vietnam. They'd come back a few hours later, no rockets, no napalm. We also had electronic surveillance aircraft, the predecessor of the AWACS, that would monitor North Vietnamese Army radio traffic coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Ours was a permanent installation. We were healthy. Our mission was to keep people healthy. Southeast Asia is a hotbed for the ancient lethal diseases. Malaria, plague, cholera, any number of diseases that kill people. We were all vaccinated. But in March of 1970, we arrived there in June of '69, our division surgeon got an alert from the Thai Public Health Service that cholera had been detected in one of the villages near our base. Now, we employed thousands of Thais on military bases in Thailand. We had 13,000 American military, and thousands of Thais worked on our bases, and at night they would go back to their villages. So the problem was obvious. They weren't vaccinated and we were, but we needed their help. We needed them to carry on the mission. And so the decision was made that our unit would go out into the countryside and set up an immunization station, and every Thai employee who to come on base would have to be vaccinated. So that's what we did. And we put together something like Larry's civic action team, 6 medics, enlisted medics, a medical officer. I was the NCO IC. We loaded up a truck with all the cholera vaccine, all the syringes, needles that we could procure. And we set out, I remember, under things in the military start in the evening before dark or just before sunrise. Started out in a pre-dawn sky, no stars, no moon, made our way somehow to a village market center, maybe 15 or 20 clicks away from our base. And we're met there by a team of US Army MPs. And we asked what they were doing there. They said, we're here to protect you. And I said, well, this is a low threat zone. We didn't bring any weapons. We're medics, we don't carry weapons anyway. And they said, you know, just do your job. We're here to protect you. They were real strack troops, and these guys were all business. They sort of thought of us as pussies, I think, because we didn't carry weapons. But we set up and a line formed, and it was like any of the voter lines we've seen in the last few weeks on steroids. It just went off and across the plain. And we started filling syringes and vaccinating as fast as we could. It was obvious that there was tension all around. We ordinarily didn't go into the villages. That was their home. So our presence was disconcerting. The MPs all had M16s, which they kept pointed just over the heads of the villagers and the people in line. That made them uncomfortable, and it made some of them angry. But we kept at it. We kept at it, and somewhere around 3 o'clock, the MP NCOIC comes to me and says, "I've just gotten a radio call. We're to leave in an hour and a half, and you are going with us." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Your mission is to protect us. Our mission is to protect us too, the whole base. We've got to vaccinate all these people." He said, "You leave when we leave." And so I talked to my medical officer, and we came up with an idea. And I came back to the sergeant, and I said, "All right, here's the deal. You've got your weapons, the M16s, we've got our weapons, these syringes and this vaccine. I want 4 of your 6 guys. And we're going to train them to draw syringes with the vaccine so they can stow their weapons. You can keep 2 guys armed, but we'll put them in the line here and we can double our pace." And he thought about it for a minute. And I think he went off and radioed in, because putting your weapon down in the military is violates regulations in many cases. And he came back and he said, "Okay." So at that point, we had 4 more instant medics. They really got into the system with us. And in an hour and a half, we loaded up our gear. They got their weapons, and we rolled out of the market center, headed for home. And on the way home, I saw something that reminded me something of my childhood. I think most of us our age, boys, used to go to Saturday matinees at the movie theater, and we watch Western movies. And there were often movies about the US cavalry in the Old West, and how when the cavalry had finished its mission, they'd turn and they'd ride back to the fort into a sunset. And that's what happened to us. We drove across this dry plain of empty rice fields, and a beautiful sunset appeared. And that put the exclamation mark on a day in which we and the Thais, the medics and the MPs, all saved lives. I got home, to reference to John's story of coming home story. I got home 6 weeks later, married the woman who had waited for me for 2 years, and we went to Fort Sam, Houston, where I'd finish as an instructor in the Army Field Medical School. And we went to church. And that night, the chaplain who's preached had just come back from Vietnam. He was a chaplain to an infantry division down in the Delta outside of Saigon. And he said to us, we all, almost everyone in this room, either has just returned from Southeast Asia or is a family member. And he said, I've just done that. And I can tell you now, I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand what did it all mean. And I suspect you feel the same way. And I squeezed my wife's hand. And he finished his sermon with this story. Alexander the Great, the greatest general in world history, deployed his armies out of Macedonia across Asia Minor beyond the limits of the known world. And he was victorious, and everywhere he went, he established great cities that offered freedom of religion and freedom of speech to their residents. And when the war was over and it was time to turn for home, one of his lieutenants came to him and said, Alexander, after all you've seen, what does it all mean? And Alexander looked at him and said, I know only this. I have seen the handiwork of God in the face of every man. And I think everyone on this broadcast and all the veterans we know may be able to say the same. It's a privilege to be here. Thanks so much.
Pete, thank you so much. I think at one point you were the first person to get this quiz right. Which war was the first in which more soldiers died in combat than from illness in the combat zone?
Korea.
And that was thanks to your father and people like you and your brother Mike in Vietnam. It was amazing.
He arrived there at the end of the war, but what it was really thanks to was antibiotics, and that has made all the difference. But that's a shocking statistic.
Yes.
Larry?
And
I'm sorry.
Yes. I'm sorry. Who was speaking?
John. Larry.
Hey, John. Go ahead.
We have some students here, and I'd like to tell a little more personal story about my service in Vietnam. I used to fly out when I first got there. I would fly out with the grunts, and I'd set our radio up in the landing zone. And I'd only been there a couple of weeks. I went over there thinking I was going to be like John Wayne and save America and go to war. And we had a patrol that went out that morning, and 20, 30 minutes later, they were ambushed. And, you know, I'm doing my battalion RTO thing. And pretty soon a couple of the soldiers were carrying this person with black pajamas on. And we had two medics in this unit that were working on this enemy, trying to save his life, who apparently had been one who had ambushed them. And I had to go over and see this. Now, mind you, I'm just getting there and I'm thinking we're really got a bad enemy that we're really fighting. And I look down and what I see is like a 10-year-old boy who had been given the mission to, you know, fire his automatic weapon on our patrol. And it made me think, what is this war all about? You know, and here we've got a 10-year-old who's attacking us. I thought I was like going to be with John Wayne. It was a terrible thing to see, and it changed my whole attitude of the war. You know, what was going on there. It's just something I wanted to share with the students.
Good story. Good story. I want to thank our audience. A number of them have chatted with us about thanking us for our service. A number of them have had relatives they lost in the Vietnam War. I am so sorry that you have lost people, but I thank you for being here, and I thank you for joining us on Veterans Day. I'm going to open this up to questions, which I guess you're going to type through chat, and while you're typing and thinking them up and typing, I will tell you very quickly about the tension of combat. This is just to buy time for you to type some questions.
We've got one, Lori.
Okay, what is that?
Great one. So a really good question, actually. They related it back to how you were treated when you came home, and not so good in some cases. But they wondered how did the locals in Vietnam treat you? How the folks in Vietnam, how the locals in Vietnam treat American troops?
I can answer that.
Yes, go ahead, Dale.
I just wanted to, there's a young woman out there that John has met. His name is Young Kroll. And Young Kroll was the daughter of a North Vietnamese dignitary, I guess you could say. And she lived in the South, and she had to kind of compromise with the Viet Cong, because what would happen is that the Viet Cong would come into the village and they would ask for help or food. And if you didn't do it, they would just kill you. And so she was, we did an interview where Gary Lilly did an interview with her a long time ago. And one of the things that she said that I thought was so important was that she said, you gave us 10 years of freedom. We had never had that in thousands of years. We've always been at war with somebody. And I thought that was so powerful a statement that, and I've talked with Vietnamese people who have emigrated to the States, and they all appreciate what we tried to do over there. And we all know that our mission, as far as, you know, the American military never lost a battle in Vietnam. Our politicians decided that we didn't need to be there anymore. And that, to me, is one of the biggest embarrassments that the country has ever done. when they decided to cut off the funds, because they had promised that if we withdrew our troops, that if they were invaded by the North, we would go back, and we didn't. And I think that that's something that has kind of haunted some of us for many, many years.
So I also would like to respond to this. The Vietnamese in areas that were controlled at night by the Viet Cong, this is where I was, that they owned it at night. We owned it by day. Those Vietnamese were caught between trying to live their lives as regular people. They wanted to be non-combatants, and caught between the two of us. We didn't kill them. In fact, we cleaned their water. We inoculated them against disease. We shared food. We acted pretty much like the guys we had seen in the movies that we were grown up on. We did our best, but they tried to survive, and that sometimes meant that we would get a volunteer as a Tiger Scout. This was a Vietnamese national who would show us around the neighborhood that he knew, and he would then suddenly disappear. And a couple of weeks later, we'd be in a terrible firefight with the Viet Cong. And as we were looking at the bodies who we had killed that day, we would find our Tiger Scout. He had gone over to the other side, whether because his family was threatened or because he thought they were winning and we weren't. We had no idea. But there was a lot of this back and forth. They were very cordial people to us. They were well-mannered, and they were doing their best to survive. And a lot of, I suppose we had some bad apples in the field. We had some people doing what are technically war crimes, but we tried our best to be good. I'll recall very briefly a quick encounter. I was on a patrol coming out of a wood line. I was not walking point, but our point man came face to face with the North Vietnamese regular. And they were both surprised. They were just a few yards apart. The North Vietnamese drew his 9mm pistol, and our guy with the full automatic, what we called full smoke in the M16, and they both emptied their weapons at point blank range, and they both completely missed. And they stood there stunned, and I walked over to the North Vietnamese and I said, "You should chu hoi." That means surrender. "You should chu hoi because there are more of us than you." He says, yes, I chu hoi." I said, "Come on, I'll buy you lunch." He says, "Lunch?" I said, "Yes, I will buy you lunch." He says, "Lunch be very nice." And so I went and I bought him lunch. And then I turned him over to the CIA because I had to, and God knows what happened to that poor man. He was trying to defend his country. And I ended up, after about 5 years, realizing this was probably the most heroic defense of a native land against an overwhelmingly powerful invader that had ever been done in history. Do we have another question?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Somebody said, Melanie Kenny said, "My father served as a Marine in Vietnam from 68 to 77. My question is, how do you get someone being stubborn as heck and two, being a Marine, to talk about the things that happened to him, and he's not alone with the issues he's still struggling with today?"
Who wants to take that?
I might be able to help on that. I would suggest that if she could find another Marine or another veteran that she would know, and use that veteran as a go-between. I know that most of us, I didn't even go to the VA until about 7 or 8 years ago, so I didn't want to have anything to do with the military or the veterans. And but thankfully, another veteran introduced me to the possibility of being with other veterans and talk about it. So my suggestion would be another veteran as a go-between.
I think that's an excellent advice. I talk with young veterans returning from the most recent wars, enrolled at mostly the University of Michigan, but also Eastern Michigan University and sometimes Washington Community College. And they find they can't talk to anybody but other veterans. They're very uncomfortable with the questions civilians ask. Civilians don't mean offense, but it just doesn't work. And so people clam up unless they're talking with somebody that's been through a comparable experience. Thank you for that question. That was an excellent one. We need another couple of hot questions here for our people.
Hey, Laurie.
Yeah.
I want to chime in just real quick too, just from my discussion with veterans as well on this. A lot of, and you and I have talked about this a lot too, is that their life happens once you get back and you build your life on that. And especially with children, your parents, you know, if you have Vietnam vets who as parents, they may want you to view them a certain way, and that may not be inclusive of what happened during their time in combat. And so having another vet who understands that, I want to echo that too, who understands and will be non-judgmental, really, who kind of knows what we do in the military and some of the things we had to do in the military, and would be able to listen and understand. And that's not always your kids or your grandkids or folks who see you as a different person than the soldier, airman, Marine, sailor that you were back when you were 19 and 20.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's a perspective too of family members, is that they may be uncomfortable sharing that because of the person they present to you is different than who they were a long time ago.
Can I jump in for a second?
Please, Dale.
I think one of the issues that many people had was when you got home, you would tell your story one time and that was it. And your relatives that had been in World War II or Korea and so forth said, well, okay, the story's done. Now get on with your life. And I think many of us buried those stories, you know, way back into our brains and tried to rebuild our lives. For the next 20, 30 years, I was not involved, much like everybody else here. I was not involved in any veterans activities whatsoever. And it wasn't until actually John got me to come to a Vietnam veterans meeting, and I didn't want to go. And I walked into the room and I looked around at all the guys and I said, Jesus, we all look alike. It was like, really, it was one of those great coming home adventures, because as you know, has been pointed out, we never really got that welcome home that everybody else did. You came home, some of us came through San Francisco when we came home and we were told to take off your uniforms because, at the airport there were protesters and everything else. I got on a plane and flew from California to New Jersey, and I think there were only 4 people on the plane. And I was sitting way in the back, and I thought, that's exactly how I felt. I was all by myself now. I didn't have the camaraderie that I had for 3.5 years. I didn't have the people that I could unload to. Veterans don't normally even share their own stories with each other. It's not unusual. It's only through things like this panel and the radio program that we even get people to talk about their experiences. Every time I'm on your panel, Phil and Lowry, I learn something new about John or Larry and Peter. Was a member of the the Fort Polk Tigerland group. It's amazing what these men and women, and I think we have to be very cognizant of the women that were in Vietnam. We're fortunate to have some that are involved in the local VVA organization, and to hear their stories. I mean, we all come at it from a different perspective. We all came from different parts of the world. But that's the one place where we ran into diversity. If you want to define diversity, join the military.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I will say that part of this is processing what happened to you and trying to figure out, 1, what it really was objectively, and 2, how much of it you want to acknowledge. Do you tell your close relatives, your loved ones, your friends, how terrified you were, how scared you were? Do you tell them about the day you went crazy and did something foolish and got a medal like the Bronze Star? I mean, which stories are they? They are, 1, they're all you, but each of us is so complex that we have to try to figure it out and present ourselves. The guy I always wanted to interview is the guy who ended up leading the successful charge up Hamburger Hill. It had been a 10-day siege with the North Vietnamese dug in and steel reinforced concrete fortifications at the top of this hill. And we charged for 10 straight days and couldn't take it. and they inflicted terrible casualties on us, and it was very difficult for helicopters to land close by and medevac those casualties out. But there was one guy, and I think he was a PFC, and he had a can of fruit cocktail, and it was very hot, and it was just terrible combat, and he was just treasuring this fruit cocktail. And every day he didn't eat it because it offered hope, and for the next day, and he just thought, I'll eat it the next day. And this went on for 10 days until the North Vietnamese shot his fruit cocktail. And then that man went crazy and just went running straight up the hill. And with the entire unit behind him, they took the hill. He made it. And I hope somebody gave him a fruit cocktail. They certainly gave him medals. But I've often wondered how he processed what happened to him that day.
Larry, I'd like to share with the people here on the Zoom that we're in Washtenaw County, and there's a memorial that's in Ypsilanti to the 76 men from Washtenaw County who died during the Vietnam War. It was built, it was designed, it was funded primarily by Vietnam veterans and those who honor their service. It's located at 7200 South Huron River Drive in Ypsilanti, and I am a little bit biased about it, but I think it's one of the most beautiful and well-kept memorials to honor those heroes that didn't get to come home.
If I may jump in. If I may jump in, I'm going to hold this up.
Peter.
This is the book that John wrote, and it is the story of each of the men from Washtenaw County who died in Vietnam. It's marvelous reading. On Memorial Day, I sat down. I think I emailed John and told him I read 25 of the biographies, and I only quit because I had a family engagement. I've read most of it. I knew some of these guys, and as did Lori, and it's a real contribution. I just want to add a couple of other things about returning home. I came home, and of course I still was in the Army for a period of time, and then came back to Ann Arbor and enrolled in law school. There were several guys in our class who were Vietnam vets. We never talked to one another. We knew who we were. No one was interested. And that was my experience for years, that if in the course of a social conversation, you know, meeting new people, a party somewhere, if inevitably in the conversation, I was disclosed that I was a Army veteran and had served in Southeast Asia. The reaction, first of all, was just silence. And I think some of it was a silence of disapproval. They just made assumptions. But also it was silence because very few people in this country, even during Vietnam, when millions served. And now we've had over 1 million people in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Gulf War, and Panama and so forth. We are a tiny fraction. And most people don't know anything about the military and never will. And therefore they don't care unless they have a family member. And I was in a situation the other night describing my first voting. I voted at Fort Polk, cleaned my rifle, polished my boots, and voted by mail. And I'm telling this story, and a group of people we're with, all socially distanced, just sat there, and they were attentive, they were respectful, but no one said a word, because it's an environment that most people know nothing about. And that adds to the isolation for veterans. My current work as a volunteer is with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we have a program called Homefront, which veterans who've had mental health experiences of their own, and I have, not service related, communicate with families of veterans who are living with mental illness. And we try to explain the nature of mental illness and therapies and resources and so forth. And we're now doing this on Zoom. But I teach that class because not only because I've had experiences with depression, but because I am a veteran. And my father, Mike's and my dad had serious depression. And that's a war unto itself. Mental illness is a war in the mind. And for a lot of people, men and women, it's also the war they came home from. And, but all the points have been made. If you need a veteran, if you find a veteran who's isolated, find a veteran who can talk to him or her.
Every now and then there are moments of incredible affirmation. I'll tell one that always amazed me. I got into journalism in the Army as an Army news correspondent. I hadn't planned to do it, discovered I liked it, stayed at it for several years. And then I got into automotive advertising. And because I had studied history at the university, I was into research. And so after a while, I knew more about cars and trucks than anybody else in automotive advertising, just because I really dug into it. And that led me to go solo, and I became a one-man tier 1 consultant to the top of General Motors, a very unusual position to be, and one that was very fragile. You were, it would be amazing to work it for a day. You would certainly never last a week, and the idea that you could last a year was unthinkable. So I'm got a meeting at the office of the president of General Motors, and I am late, and I am speeding. I'm speeding down I-96, and I am suddenly chased by an unmarked older model Chevy Impala. I won't go into the details. I didn't try to run away, but as I got off on West Grand Boulevard, he pulled alongside of me, beeped his horn. I looked over, 3 stripes. He was a Detroit police sergeant. We pulled over. I got out of my car with my hands high and moved towards him, something I would not advise doing today. This was several years ago. I moved towards him as he was getting out of the car, and I said, "Oh, thank God you're a police officer." And I said, "I'm so grateful." He said, "Yeah, I bet." I said, "No, I thought you were some crazy blankety blank, and I was going to have to run for it, and then we were going to shoot it out." And he said, "Are you carrying?" And he drew his weapon. And I said, "No, I'm a Vietnam combat veteran. I was going to get yours." And he looks at me and he said, "What year were you there?" I said, 1969. He said, "I know you." I said, "I know you." And so I blew off the meeting with the office of the president. He blew off the ticket. We went off and got pie and coffee. And by God, that's a 9th Infantry Division reunion.
You know, Lowry, there's something I'd like to share that's been my experience that one veteran can look at another person in a different environment. And I don't know if it's sixth sense or what, but you can pretty well guess that they served in the military. I had experience twice in this yesterday. I was having breakfast at a restaurant, and a gentleman came up to me and asked me about my T-shirt, and he didn't have anything on that looked like he was a veteran. But I said, "You served in the military, didn't you?" And it turns out he was infantry in Vietnam. And I had the same thing happen later in the afternoon. There's something about the way veterans, or most veterans, sort of carry themselves, and we're a special group.
We are. So we have a great question here. If you could advise a young person, a young man, right before being, if you could advise a young person to the young man you were right before you were sent to Vietnam, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell yourself right before you went to Vietnam? You guys want to mull that over? I have a fast answer, but I don't want to be the one always talking. What would you tell yourself before you went to Vietnam? Well, you guys are thinking about
careful.
it. I will say
Don't.
be careful.
Be careful.
Don't go.
Don't go.
I flew into
How far is Canada?
I flew into Cameron Bay. Napalm was burning in the hills. Our runway was under mortar attack. We had to double time off, dive into bunkers, low crawl, where we filled out forms in triplicate or quadruplicate, whatever it was in the Army did in those days. And then the mortar attack stopped and they showed us the movie Barbarella with Jane Fonda. And I couldn't watch it. It was, for a young man, maybe the dream movie, but I couldn't watch it. I was so agitated. I went pacing around, and I finally paced into the pissoir, and I'm standing over this long tin tray, and I read on the wall, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, because I am the toughest MF in Vietnam." And that did something for me, not the religious part, the sacrilege part. I realized, all right, I can live with those words. I can live up to that. You know what? I can't be shot. I cannot be killed. And I just embraced that. And it turned out that night of the story I told you about where my shirt was shot out, I couldn't be killed. I couldn't be shot. By the way, that doesn't apply to me now. I am very careful. Look both ways crossing the street and when waiting for the asteroid to land on my head. But I think you have to have the belief that you can make it. If you believe you can't make it, then you may not make it. You must believe you can make it. And if you're wounded, you must believe you will survive the wound. You must believe that you will not die. Because a big part of living is that spark, that magic spark, that sacred spark that is man and woman. Keep it going, and you'll keep going. I don't know if that was helpful to the person who asked, but that's what I would have told myself back then.
I think the idea of your being invincible was part of it. I think that's one of the reasons that they want, 18, 19, 20-year-olds to be in the service, because we are invincible. And I know when I was going over to Vietnam, I was anxious, I was excited, I was frightened, I was scared. I got to the 90th replacement, which was near Long Binh, and they took us, this is the quick story of it. Got off the airplane, they put us on school buses, and the school buses had chicken wire all over all the windows. And at the front of the bus, there was a Rambo guy, and at the back of the bus, there was a Rambo guy. And we drove through the town of Bien Hoa, and there were flashes of light. It was late at night. There were flashes of light all over the place. I don't know where they came from or what they were. And as you looked out the window, the people were looking at you, and they looked at you with such disdain and hate. And you're going, Jesus, this is not going to be fun. I could tell this right away. And so fast forward to a year back, I go back to the 90th replacement to leave the country. I go into the officers club, and standing in the officers club is my former CO from basic training at Fort Polk, Captain Siebert, redheaded son of a bitch. And I walked up to him, and he looked at me, and I go, Captain, well, he's a major now. I said, Major Siebert, hi, I'm, Throneberry. I was in your company, went through basic training, 67, so on and so forth. And he looked at me, looked at my name, and he goes, you lived. I said, yes, sir, I did. And that was the best moment I had. I did. And, get on another plane and come home. That was the best feeling in the world, was to get out of that place. That's why the song was so popular.
We got to get out of this place if it's the last thing we ever do. Hey, we have a question. Where can John's book, Pete, that you held up? John, where can people buy your book?
Well, Lowry, my book is not for sale, but if someone would like a copy, I'd be happy to mail them one. I'd give them away, because my feeling is every time one of those 76 stories is read, a little breath of life comes back to that person whose sacrifice will not be forgotten. And it's, you could send it to our VVA chapter, because I get the mail there, and it's just VVA 310, Post Office Box 3221, Ann Arbor, Michigan 48106. And I'd be glad to mail people a copy. There's an opportunity, if somebody wants to make a donation, there'll be an envelope inside in the book that you can make a donation, which goes directly to the perpetual care fund of that memorial, and to keep that memorial looking beautiful in perpetuity. So if I'll say it again, it's VBA, that's Vietnam Veterans of America, 310, PO Box 3221, Ann Arbor 48106, and address it to John. Well, I pick up all the mail, so I'll get it either way. I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge Iva, who says, thanks for mentioning women in Vietnam. As a nurse, I wanted to go in the military. It did not work out. But Iva, thank you so much for trying. There were not that many women in Vietnam, but they were very important to all of us. Some were nurses, some worked with the Red Cross, some were correspondents with correspondence credentials for major newspapers. Women were not in combat at that time, but it was so important to see an American face, and if you were a male combat soldier, to see an American female face, it meant a lot. And it means a lot to us that you made every effort to get in.
Or if I might add to your story there, I believe we had 9 women who died in Vietnam. The result of crashes and mortar rounds. But the military has changed since then, and I know that within the Afghan-Iraq war zone, we've lost well over 180 women. So the whole combat picture has changed since Vietnam as far as women are concerned.
We have another good question.
Hey,
What advice would you give to the newer generation of veterans re-entering the civilian world after serving? This is from Joel. Joel, good question. I'll be real quick. I would say first and foremost, move, be active, jog, do weights, swim, whatever you like. It will help calm you down, stabilize things. Try to eat really healthy, because that's really important while you're waiting for the stress to fall off. And don't think you're that crazy. We were all that crazy when we came back. And then after, it might be a year, might be 5 years, it all began to settle down. You got to have faith that it will work out and it will settle down. Anyone else want to respond to that? Re-entering the world?
I think many of the schools have student veterans organizations now, which would have been, a godsend 50 years ago. I went to Washtenaw Community College myself back in 1971, and there was a corner of the old student center that they had there, which was a double wide trailer. And there were veterans that would just sit there, and we would just kind of rotate in and out between classes. And I think, that was kind of an unofficial student veteran organization, but now they've got a regular room to themselves over there. I know the student veterans at Michigan is a pretty active chapter. There's great opportunities to, and you don't talk about your experiences. You just talk about what your dreams might be, your aspirations and so forth. And, where do you think you're going to go? Some of those connections may come to fruition down the road. I wanted to promote another book, but I can't zoom in here. There's another book out there that was written by veterans from Washtenaw County, and it's called, what do we call this thing? We Answered the Call. And I think there's about 30 stories in there written by local veterans. And again, this is another free book. And if you send John and ask him about that one, we'll make sure that you can get one of those too.
The schools also have them.
Right. Yeah. Many schools around here, but before most of the schools in the county have them. We weren't able to get them into the Ann Arbor library because of the pandemic, but we've got books available. So if you want to know what some of the people locally did, in addition to John's great stories of these young men that were killed in Vietnam, these are stories that were written by some people that survived for 50 years.
Wow. So also for those of you who are returning to the real world for military service, to those of you who are just audience members and much respected students, just people in real life, I encourage you all to look into your own histories. You'll find that you all have some military service in your background, in ancestors. Some of you may have been in the Civil War for certain. I can tell you that my forebear, Solomon Dolph, was in the boat with George Washington crossing the Delaware. He's the one who said, "For God's sakes, George, sit down." But take a look at your own ancestry, and I think you'll be amazed and rightly proud of the service that your forebears have delivered. And just if you say nice things to a vet, you help us out a lot. We appreciate it. We're getting near winding up here. We got a couple more minutes. Anybody got anything?
I would just, picking up on a Dale story, I served 2013, 2014 as the advisor to a newly opened Veterans Center at a community college in Illinois outside of St. Louis. That's where I was living at the time. And to have a place for student veterans to come that was only for them, not the other young people in this college with thousands of enrollees, meant a great deal. And one guy came in to our vet center because he was trying to figure out how to enroll. And he said, you know, I deployed to Iraq 4 times. When I get off the plane at Bagram or wherever we land, I know exactly what I'm doing from the moment my feet hit the tarmac until I get on the plane to return home. I walk onto this campus this morning, I have no idea what's going on or what to do. And we said, well, you came to the right place. And we walked him around, and I hope he had the successful academic career that he had earned.
That's a terrific story, Pete. It's great the way you take care of people. Before we all break, I want to do a special shout out to Dale Throneberry and his Veterans Radio Show. You can find that their website online. You can stream past shows. You can listen to the shows live. Dale and his many friends, including John and Larry and myself and Pete, but many, many more. It is just a wonderful, wonderful narration on the state of the world, what service was like, what threats we're facing, and what tools we have to meet those threats. I am so admiring of the show. Veterans Radio, check it out.
Thank you all to those of you who participated today, who listened in. We had 80 people at one point, and that's wonderful.
I'd like to thank, gentlemen, thank you so much again for telling your stories and talking and giving advice and sharing stuff. And you're right, always new stories. I've learned some more stuff today. I always learn stuff from you all, every single panel we've done. Laurie, thanks again for hosting this today and getting this group of folks together again. We really appreciate it. The University of Michigan, we appreciate it. I get to say this, and I'm sure a lot of other folks would back me up on this from the administration. Thank you very much. We probably didn't say that enough when you first came back. The University of Michigan thanks you for your service. And that's from, I know our president would say the same thing. So thank you very much for what you did. Thank you for helping out. The other thing I will say, from somebody who does this work in college work, you have made it possible for this generation to come back and be successful. The Vietnam veterans who started talking about, we're not going to go through this again, you're not going to do this to this generation again, have made it really possible for all of us who do this important work to do this work. It was your voice that inspired this. It was your voice that started this out. So for all of my colleagues across the country who do this kind of work, we would not be doing it without your voice, without your help. And so thank you so much for your help and your inspiration in doing this. So
thank you, Phil, and thank you for everything you've done for the veterans at the University of Michigan, in Ann Arbor, in Washtenaw County. Phil has played an instrumental role in getting a Fisher House built right next to the Ann Arbor VA for the families of seriously ill vets at the hospital. They stay for free in wonderful surroundings, and Phil played a major role in raising the money for that and getting it built.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. It is my honor always to, as a child of a Vietnam veteran, and as a service member myself, it's always an honor to be amongst you, and to help where I can. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Happy Veterans Day to you all. Go out and get your free coffee. Get some free dinners tonight. There's places that will deliver, I heard, and places where you can go get some to go. Please take care and keep safe, and keep well. And we hope to see you. Please, let's do this again, same time next year. All right.
All right.
All right.
We'll see you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Over and out.
Over and out.
Over and out.